You already know that the cross-examination of the witness is the most exciting part of any good courtroom drama, and cross-examinations in debate can be just as exciting. So let's take a few minutes to explore the world of cross-ex and discover how you can win rounds with good cross-ex skills. The cross-examinations in your debate rounds are important and strategic ways for you to develop your arguments and your understanding of your opponent's arguments. But by themselves, cross-examinations aren't the same as good constructives and rebuttals. Instead, think of cross-examinations as the icing on the cake. Here's why. Depending on your judge, the cross-examinations may be the least important or the most important part of the round. For highly experienced judges, cross-ex is simply a time for debaters to clarify their understanding of their opponent's arguments. Most experienced judges don't flow cross-ex, and some ignore cross-ex altogether. For inexperienced judges, cross-ex is where the direct clash occurs and where debaters can go head-to-head and outwit the opposing team, thus proving that they are the superior debater. Inexperienced judges typically pay close attention to the cross-ex and take notes and perhaps even base their decision on what happens during cross-ex. But regardless of their judge, there are 15 strategies and techniques you can and should use during cross-ex to improve your chances of winning. First, let's start with the 5 strategies you want to use while being cross-examinationed. Number 1, admit nothing. Nothing. Your opponent's goal is to get you to say things that you can't take back. For example, your plan is to eliminate warrantless wiretaps. Your opponent will want to ask questions in cross-examination that get you to admit that your plan could increase the number of terrorists, or that warrantless wiretaps aren't illegal, or that they could benefit in some circumstances. No doubt your opponent will hammer you with questions until you break and say something you won't want to say. To combat this, you can use the phrase, "We contend that." This phrase allows you to take a position on an argument without necessarily having to explain it. For example, we contend that eliminating warrantless wiretaps will not increase the number of terrorists. And no matter how many times you're asked or how many times you answered, you simply stick to your guns and simply say what it is that you contend. Number 2, pivot. To pivot means to turn the focus of the debate back to your strongest arguments. In other words, pivoting essentially means not letting a bad question get in the way of a great answer. So let's say that your affirmative plan is to end the PRISM program, and the negative cross-examiner asks you how eliminating PRISM prevents terrorism. Your response? Simple. The PRISM program is a greater threat to our freedoms than terrorism. So if we believe that freedom is worth protecting, it begins with eliminating the PRISM program. Number 3, expand. When I say expand your answers, I mean that your goal should be to answer as few questions as possible, and you can do that by giving longer, more complex answers where the answers aren't immediately clear. Not only does this arguably improve the quality and context of your answer, it also reduces the number of questions your opponent can ask in 3 minutes. Number 4, be honest. If you are asked a question to which you don't know the answer, it's essential that you not lie or fabricate the truth. If not knowing the answer to a question is bad, lying or making up an answer is far worse. More importantly, this is a violation of the best things about debate. Less importantly, you lock yourself into a position that cannot be defended or proven in later speeches. If you say that there are only 4 drones in the sky right now during cross-ex, the opposing team is going to demand that you provide evidence in your constructives, and if you don't have that evidence, you're going to look silly. So be honest, and if you don't know the answer, just say that you'll need to look that answer up in your next speech. Number 5, know your arguments. If your ideas are good, your evidence is sound, and your analysis is strong, you'll have no problem defending against even the toughest questions. But if you don't know your arguments that well, or if it's the first time you've read this in a debate round, it won't take much for the opposing team to confuse you, make you contradict yourself, or knock you off your game. So to review, when you are being cross-examined, you shouldn't admit anything. You should pivot to your strengths, expand your answers to minimize the number of questions the opposing team can ask. You should be honest, and you should know your arguments inside and out. Now let's take a look at the 5 strategies you should use when you are asking questions. Number 1, ask specific questions. When you ask vague and open-ended questions, you not only risk confusing everyone, you also open the doors to long-winded answers that don't answer the question. Instead, think for a moment about what it is you want to know and ask specifically for that information. Number 2, center the cross-examination on the evidence. There's a big difference between asking how much the plan costs versus asking how much the plan costs according to the evidence you read. By centering the round on the evidence, you eliminate the wiggle room for the opposing team to sneak in assumptions and opinions. Instead, you limit their answers to what their authors say in the evidence that was read. And if they can't point to the specific language from a specific author in a specific piece of evidence, you've just added another great argument to the round. Number 3, listen to the answer. Ask follow-up questions, ask for details, get clarifications, and don't settle for incomplete answers. I've judged hundreds of debate rounds, and the biggest mistake I see kids make in cross-examination is allowing the opponents to give weak answers to important questions because the cross-examiner wasn't even listening. It's true that you need to be thinking a few steps ahead, but you also need to listen to the answer. Maybe your opponent used the word could instead of will. Maybe he or she didn't even answer the question at all. These sorts of gaps between clear answers and unclear questions often indicate gaps in your opponent's arguments, so don't let those answers go untouched. Number 4, nitpick. To nitpick is to focus on the tiny details that make a huge difference. The best place to nitpick is the evidence, read by the opposing team. Little words make a big difference, and many times your opponent will try to claim much more than the evidence actually says. So pay attention to the claims, warrants, and language in each and every card read by your opponents. Number 5, think ahead. You've got 3 minutes to fill, and you need to space out your questions so that the most important ones get asked and answered. That could mean putting all of your most important questions up front, but it could also mean organizing your questions so that you look consistently strong during the entire cross-ex. Over time, you'll develop the strategy of listening to an answer while also thinking about your next question. The better you are at this skill, the more adept you will be at cross-examining your opponents. To summarize, the 5 strategies to use when asking questions. First, ask specific questions. Second, center the questions on the evidence. Third, listen to the answer. Fourth, nitpick and pay attention to the details. And fifth, think ahead to your next questions. Now, the last 5 strategies I want to teach you apply to everyone in the round. Here they are. First, be polite and respectful. I've seen some very heated cross-examinations before, and some cross-exes even become verbally aggressive. Less experienced judges are very sensitive to the professionalism of debaters in cross-ex, and their decisions are often based not on who is right and wrong, but who is the most professional. So no matter what, keep your cool and stay professional. Second, don't interrupt. You need time to ask your questions, and your opponent needs time to answer them. If you don't give your opponent time to do his or her job, you look aggressive and overbearing. Moreover, the judge will be sympathetic to your opponent. Over time, you'll develop physical and vocal strategies that help your opponent and you pace the questions and answers at a comfortable pace. Third, interrupt. Now that's obviously the opposite of what I just told you, but there are polite and respectful ways of stopping your opponent from running away with the cross-examination and expanding their answers. This is especially true if your opponent is taking a long time to answer the question. Interrupting is a necessary skill, and it's important to know when and how to do it. You can say things like, "Thank you, I have my answer," to give yourself a way to politely move on. Fourth, face the judge. Just as in a court of law, the debater should stand side by side with the shoulders about 1 foot apart. Both speakers will face the judge squarely and will look at the judge and make eye contact while speaking. You never want to look at a debater when speaking. Not only does that position make you look weaker, it can also be considered aggressive. Fifth and finally, know your arguments. If you don't know your arguments inside and out, your opponent will be likely to twist and turn the argument so that by the end of the cross-examination, you can't even see straight. Know what the taglines say, know what the authors say, and know what the analysis proves. The better you understand your own arguments, the more protected you will be from tough cross-examination questions. These 15 strategies are easy to understand, but hard to master. You should be conducting regular cross-examination drills in which you invite others to ask you the toughest questions they can think of about your case or your negative arguments. And you should be offering to do the same for others. And before you'll know it, you'll be a master of cross-examinations. That's all for now. Good luck, debaters.